Hello guys, and welcome back to Tuesdays with Philly, another episode or video that I'm releasing on this YouTube channel. I've been away for a little bit because I've been focusing on uni and I've also been a little bit sick, so please excuse any nasally voice that I have going on or phlegm. But let's just jump right into a check-in. So wherever you are, let's take a moment to slow down and just come into the present. And we'll do 3 breaths in through the nose with 1 sip at the top and then exhale through the mouth. And the last one. Awesome. Okay, so I'm very excited to get into this episode today where I'm going to be talking about when and how attachment can be a good thing. Now, given that I touch a lot on, Buddhist principles on this channel, I think that this is really important because, in order to integrate Buddhist philosophy in the West, there has to be, I feel like, a lot of acceptance and alterations that need to be made. We all wish that we could go and live in isolation in the Himalayas, okay, and just be in constant awe of nature and at peace. But in the West, in urbanized settings and cities, that's extremely difficult to achieve. And the reason why I say that as well is because there's actually a lot of science that also has come out and supports the notion that awe, or being in awe of nature or of things that are grand and beautiful, is really supportive of entering into meditative states and also really cultivating a sense of humility and peace and equanimity. I've just been reflecting on recently how it was so much more easier for me when I lived up in Queensland and I was surrounded by nature, just immersed in the beauty of trees, the sky, the ocean. It was so much more easier for me to really cultivate and maintain a state of non-attachment and equanimity and peace because I found myself constantly in awe and really humbled by nature. And that's very difficult down here living in the city of Melbourne. And so, because of that, the stresses of city life and the pressures of university and also, the isolation of living on my own meant that, and the lack of nature meant that it was very hard for me to maintain sometimes and really stay centered by Buddhist principles of non-attachment. And although I did, for the most part of my first 12 months living here, it resulted in a lot of loneliness. I would be lying to you if I said that I never experienced really long episodes of depression because I just felt so alone and I had such a lack of social connectivity around me, even things like physical touch, intimate connections. Although I had colleagues at work and things like that, and I would see friends at university, it wasn't the same in terms of the depth of our relationships and the relationships that I had and the connections that I had. And, even something like having a hug, right? It's so sad to think that some individuals can go months and months and months without even receiving a hug, right? And that's what my life was like in the first 12 months of living here because my family are from Queensland and I hadn't really made those intimate connections down here. And that's kind of what I'm going to be touching on today, is when and how can we bring healthy forms of attachment into our life and integrate into our life while simultaneously really being committed to meditation and other Buddhist practices, and really almost integrate Buddhist practices and Buddhist philosophy with having healthy attachments. Like, can they exist simultaneously? And I believe that they can, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So let's dive into the first lesson of the week, like the lesson of the week first. And it's about, I've been recently watching Robert Sapolsky's channel, and it's called Father Offspring Interviews, and I love it. It's his channel, and I'll put it here, and they release videos every week, I think, quite frequently, and they talk about all of these varied topics of related to science, psychology, evolution, philosophy. And in a recent episode, they were talking about what the origins are of human violence and war. And was warfare something that existed between tribes in the Paleolithic era when we were evolving and innately violent? Are we innately violent? Do we have this innate propensity towards warfare? Or is warfare a product of more modern times and modernity? Things surrounding agriculture and the use of land. So you have these two competing arguments, that warfare is innate and that our ancestral tribes engaged in systematic warfare, or warfare only came about because of modernity and the advent of agriculture and economic production and property. The fighting over resources and systemic settling of different nations and peoples, and the way that can start conflict over resources and differences and everything like that. So Robert Sapolsky did an incredible job of explaining this. I will link the video in the description below. But essentially the takeaway is, drumroll, that no, humans are not innately prone or predisposed to warfare. However, when we look at our evolutionary ancestors and we look at how they lived in tribes, nomadic tribes, there is very little evidence that they engaged in systemic warfare against other tribes. Although there has been findings of, skeletons buried with like bow and arrows and things like that, it is not confirmed whether or not that was used for interhuman conflict or more like hunting and things like that. But essentially, there was no evidence of systemic warfare. However, we know that there's evidence of individual interpersonal violence within these clans and within tribes. So it wouldn't be uncommon for a male to kill another male, right? Or a male to kill his partner because of XYZ. So there are these singular instances of human-to-human conflict and violence within our ancestral past. But there is no evidence of broad, widespread warfare, intertribal warfare. And so the implications of this are that warfare didn't come about until we had the capabilities to commit large-scale acts of violence over, broad systemic issues related to agriculture, food, resources, differences in culture, things like that. But that stems from our innate capability and capacity to inflict violence or aggression on an individual level, if that makes sense, or an intergroup level. So intergroup conflict and violence was not prevalent, and it's not an innate thing. However, intragroup violence, so violence within the group, these singular instances did occur. And that also, could be a result. We share a lot of DNA with chimpanzees, and chimpanzees are very, violent, but we also share DNA with other primate species that are not violent and are very peaceful and, prone to more pro-social behaviors. So it's very complex. But I just think that that's really interesting because it highlights that war is a product of more macro kind of societal level conditions and structures, but nonetheless maybe intimately linked with our evolutionary past, that humans, individual humans, have the capacity and propensity towards violence on an individual level. The only difference now is that we have the capability to enact violence on this broader, larger scale, and also really feel disconnected from that as well. You can have an individual that sits in some kind of, military base in the desert in the US, press a button, and then that detonates a drone bomb and it kills hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of civilians, across the globe, halfway across the globe in the Middle East or something. There's such a deep disconnect there, which is so incredibly sad. And so, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting lesson of the week. Not that there's really that much philosophical takeaway from it. I mean, there could be about, the negative impacts of broad socioeconomic structures that have come to the fore and are so central to the way that we live as a society now, and says a lot about globalism and things like that. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting lesson, and I really highly recommend Robert Sapolsky's channel. I think he's incredible. He's a fantastic communicator. So if you are interested in science, philosophy, religion, psychology, please check the channel out. All right, so, and I will be pulling some information from some of his videos as well throughout this discussion. So diving into the topic, there can be a lot of negative implications in trying to maintain stringently and adhere stringently to Buddhist philosophies and Buddhist principles in the Western world. And as I said, that's because we, in urbanized environments, we don't have access to awe-inspiring moments. We have no access to nature. It's, often high levels of air pollution, poverty, So you're seeing things that are really negative, and it's just a very high stress environment, right? So it's very hard to maintain non-attachment, especially to social connections, living in an environment like that. And today I want to talk about a lot of the importance of social connection. And one of the first, negatives of really, I guess, diving headfirst into self-isolation, or trying to maintain this air of non-attachment, is when we don't have consistent social connection and social interactions, our mind and our inner dialogue can become quite loud, to the point where we're just constantly talking about the self. It's all like just relaying a narrative or a story or negative beliefs about ourselves. And there's no space or conversation to interrupt that constant conversation that's going on in our inner mind, right? There's no social interactions in order to disrupt and interrupt that inner monologue that we're constantly having. I think people really underestimate how important it is when, you can wake up and just be in the worst funk, right? You're just in a funk, something happened the day before, and you're just relaying it in your head, relaying it. But all you need is a conversation or to debrief about it with someone, and that interrupts it and shuts it down completely. Although meditation can also be fantastic, if you're someone who's prone to rumination, sometimes meditation can even make it a bit worse, right? Witnessing the rumination can be quite hard. So having social connection to disrupt that rumination and quell it or redirect it can be really valuable. And that's something that I think that I struggled with, right? Is last year, spending so much time alone, I got really stuck in these thought cycles and patterns of beliefs and narratives that didn't serve me, right? They were related to my past or even the future, like thinking about the future, what if, and that can just be really draining, and send you into a little bit, it put me into a really significant state of just feeling keyed up, right? I never felt relaxed. I would feel relaxed when I did my yoga and meditation, but that only helped so much, right? Besides that, I would finish my morning routine, go about my day, but I'd go about my day still a little bit highly strung, right? Okay, I've got to do this, I have this expectation. And the narrative's going on in my head at the same time that we're kind of supporting that behavior. So I think that that's really important, right? And if you don't have intimate social connections to really break down those inner thoughts and monologues, right, to express them to someone else in a way that can be safe and objective, it just keeps playing in your head, right? I couldn't go to my colleagues and be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about right now, because they didn't know me on that level, right? So the depth of social connection is really important. So as I said, I found that I was feeling these deep feelings of loneliness, right? And going months without socializing or experiencing physical touch and things like that. And I think this highlights really, I guess, the importance of many things, right? So what does social connection look like? What does healthy forms of social connection look like? And to me, it means engaging in shared activities with other people, shared attention, watching a movie with someone, playing a game with someone, going on a walk with someone, right? So spending time with someone, engaging in shared activities and shared attention. And that can really help increase our well-being, our sense of well-being. I think I didn't realize how much it was impacting me negatively in terms of my cognition, my motivation, and just my general sense of self, right? I felt almost somewhat insecure, unstable sometimes in myself without having the assurance or reflection of another person. And, I think some of the things I want to touch on to illustrate or having minimal social connection, some of the negative impacts of that can be seen in many patterns in the environment, sociologically, scientifically. First of which is that women live longer than men, okay? And one of the underlying theories to explain this difference in life expectancy is that women tend to have deeper social connections and they tend to maintain those relationships throughout their lives. So they tend to maintain deep social friendships and allocate time for those friendships, whereas men, it's been shown, tend to lose touch with their friends and their male friends from early life. And so they become quite lonely, or they maybe become heavily reliant on their wife. And that goes hand in hand with some other problems in relation to emotionality and the extent to which men feel that they can share their emotions and what they're experiencing in a way that's empathetic with other men. And instead they maybe rely on their partner. And that's just, I think, a result of sociocultural norms, which is really sad. And one of the predictors of a long life is just having a really close, intimate social circle. Additionally, to build more on that, a second point of evidence is that one of the primary lifestyle risk factors for dementia is a lack of social connection, as well as experiences of stress, isolation, and depression throughout life. Now, depression and loneliness can go hand in hand, and the impacts that this has on our mental health is truly grounded in neurophysiology, right? And I think that this can be seen when we look at neurodevelopment of infants and just how important the bond is between infant and mother for the healthy neurodevelopment of that child. So there's been several studies done in rats and in humans that demonstrate that social isolation and having a lack of intimate bonding with a caregiver is extremely detrimental for brain development, because those areas of our brain that are responsible for empathy, executive functions, social intelligence, being able to read social cues, things like that, they become underdeveloped. And what becomes overdeveloped? The amygdala and all of these regions of the brain that may, when overactive, really instill emotional dysregulation, issues with compulsion and impulsivity and fear and anxiety, right? So that's why having such close social bonds in childhood is so important. But it doesn't just stop in childhood. The importance of social connectivity and bonding shouldn't just stop at age 12, okay? It needs to be consistent throughout the life course in order to maintain our well-being and our mental health. And that's really difficult because for many reasons, for many people, they don't experience that kind of consistency of social support or bonding. I think looking at that, it makes sense why one of the primary risk factors for dementia, which is a neurodegenerative disease, one of the primary risk factors for it is loneliness. And it just really does have a tangible neurodevelopmental impact. And one of the last bits of evidence that I'd like to touch on that is also spoken about by Robert, is that when we look at the animal kingdom and species which are, by our metrics, quite intelligent, so non-human primates, and there's a species of bird as well, like parrots that can talk. I can't remember the name of the species, I might put it here. But those species, the commonality is that those are the species that have the longest maturational period of social bonding and connectedness with their mum and dad. So a lot of non-human primates, they live in kind of group tribal clans and are close to their family members. And the same goes with birds as well. So parrots that can speak, the particular parrots that are studied that have really good metrics of prefrontal activation, are species that spend many years with their caregivers, which is so cool to think about. And so, I think it was non-human primates, birds, dolphins, right? Another mammal that's very intelligent. Whales spend time with their caregivers. So I think this illustrates the real importance, right, of intimate, close connections. And basically what Robert said is that this demonstrates the real role that plays. Okay, so the role of relational connection and relationships with caregivers is so important for the formative development of our prefrontal cortex and of executive functions and having the capacity to learn, okay, and be open to exploring your environment independently. This is another key tenet of developmental psychology, right? In the stages of development, every child should enter a stage of development where they feel safe enough to be autonomous and to go out and explore the world, right? To pick up a ball and drop it, to try walking on their own. And they should be able to do that autonomously with a felt sense of safety, knowing that they have reliable caregivers nearby, or, if I go over here, mummy's gonna have an eye on me, but I feel safe to do this, okay? And if I make a mistake, mummy or daddy will come over and scaffold and redirect me to do a certain task correctly, okay? So this is really highlighting the importance of, again, that joint activity and that joint connection that has to be established in order to actually go on and be autonomous, right? So the capacity to embody non-attachment actually is secondary to first having healthy attachments, right? So the healthy attachment and healthy relationship and joining that we experience when we're children is actually a necessary prerequisite to being able to go and maybe engage in some kind of journey of non-attachment, right? because we need to have a felt sense of safety and security within ourselves, that we are lovable, that we can be accepted by someone, and that, you know, if we must make a mistake, there's going to be someone there we can fall back on. We need to have that as a prerequisite before we actually go out and endeavor to explore non-attachment. And I think that those pieces of evidence that I've just lined out, you know, that the reasons why women live longer, that loneliness is a risk factor for dementia, and that animals in the animal kingdom that spend the longest amount of time with family members before maturing, or maybe always are in a kind of communal environment, are actually the most intelligent animals. So I just think that that's really powerful. And again, going back to a little bit of the science here, spending time with others that we care for elicits the release of neuromodulators and hormones which can bolster our health, such as serotonin and oxytocin, which allows us to feel a felt sense of safety in the body. Okay, and the release of serotonin and oxytocin is slow. It's slow, so it happens long term. And that's why healthy relationships and the maintenance of healthy relationships is so important. And in turn, spending time with others can also be rewarding as we receive attention and recognition. And the best kind of recognition is that which we receive just for being ourselves, okay? So not having to perform, not having to dress up, not having to mask, simply spending time with someone and engaging with another person or a group of people as you are, showing up as you are, and, you know, being able to receive recognition, shared mutual attention with another person on that basis. And the rewarding quality of this reflects our earliest memories as well, of receiving love and attention and hopefully unconditional positive regard from our parents just for being born, right? We see this all the time in new parents, where like the baby is just, I kind of resonate with this, where like a baby's born and it's just perfect, okay? Nothing a baby could do could ever, like, they're just beautiful, all right? And you see that in parents where it's just like, they're the apple of their parents' eye, and so they should be, you know? And I think when we have friendships like that or relationships like that, when we're adults, where you can just show up as you are and you're just accepted with unconditional positive regard. Like, I have many friendships like that where there's no pressure to perform, there's no pressure to show up on time or to dress up or act a certain way, just come as you are. It's so healthy, and it can really activate really like the release of so many wonderful neurotransmitters in a really positive sense. And by rewarding, I mean it can activate dopamine. So a sign of a healthy relationship is actually almost like a renewed sense of autonomy and a sense of motivation, right? So after spending time with someone that makes you feel safe, that you feel is a really healthy bonding experience, you might come away from that feeling quite like motivated and autonomous to be independent, but also at the same time you feel so secure in that bond. So I think that that's really important. And that was going to be kind of the point that I finished on here, in that we can have social connections that are unhealthy. We can have relationships that are toxic, okay, and that don't nourish our souls and don't elicit the same responses that I'm talking about in our nervous system. We can have social relationships that elicit stress and cortisol and anxiety, not serotonin and oxytocin and all of these wonderful neuromodulators. And so I guess what's important to realize is that to have meaningful, and this kind of is, again, bringing Buddhist philosophy back into the fore, okay? To have meaningful and beautiful and healthy connections, you first need to have an established sense of presence, okay? And this is why I'm so grateful for my practice with meditation and yoga and all of these things, and my adherence to Buddhist philosophy, is that it really emphasizes that, again, the importance of security within yourself and a sense of presence and clear seeing, okay? The ability to see clearly in your relationships, what relationships serve you in a positive sense and are healthy and reflect who you are in a really beautiful way, and what relationships instead muddy that reflection or make you feel icky or negative or hostile. And so just to finish off, I want to kind of talk about some of the signs of a good connection and a positive connection. And they include increased motivation and a sense of action after spending time with an individual or a group of people. So when you come away from spending time with a group of friends and you actually feel rejuvenated, you feel motivated, you feel seen, where you've been spending time in a group of friends that are supportive of your goals and supportive of who you want to be as a person, and that feeling is mutual. You should walk away from those social interactions feeling fulfilled and motivated to be better, or just to continue to be yourself in a really beautiful way, you know. And so that's the second sign, is feeling motivated to do good and be good. Okay, so you should walk away from your social relationships and interactions feeling a sense of wanting to be good and do good, you know. And that thirdly, a renewed sense of autonomy and a felt sense of safety as well, to be able to venture out and be independent, knowing that you have reliable friends and loved ones to support you. Okay, so you should feel, when you look at your relationships, you should feel like, oh, I feel safe to go out on my own and to try new things and to be curious, and knowing that I'll be accepted, I'll be given guidance if I need, I'll be given support, and positive regard. Okay, and that doesn't mean that everyone supports every single thing you do, but it means that you know that they're going to be there, and whatever help they do provide you is going to be critical and coming from a place of care. And so a fourth component of a good connection is not feeling judged. And yeah, just having that degree of acceptance and feeling comfortable with embodying who you are and exercising your autonomy and agency outside of the relationship or the friendship or the social group. Okay, you should be able to feel safe to exercise different interests and hobbies and not feel degraded because of it. So yeah, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this episode and can really take some varied information away from it. And I hope that you enjoyed me talking a bit about the science behind this topic and why and how social connection can really be so beautiful and really provide us with such fertile ground for a sense of calmness and equanimity. And actually, you know, in the West, in this urbanized setting, healthy social connections can actually really cultivate and support our path along, you know, the eightfold path, or in embodying Buddhist principles and philosophy. So Buddhist philosophy can go hand in hand with having these really beautiful social attachments in a way. And that ultimately what epitomizes that is recognizing that we must try and maintain presence in all of our relationships and interactions, and realize that we can use presence as a litmus test for whether or not the connection is something which is generative or not. Okay, using your presence as a litmus test of whether or not the connection is providing clarity and is acting as a clear reflection of who you are, your values, or is that relationship actually acting as like muddying the reflection and making it not so pretty, you know? Is it confusing your conception of yourself? Is it muddying the waters? Is it making you second guess yourself? Okay, and really be discriminating with that and act accordingly. You know, maintain boundaries, cut friendships and relationships that don't serve you or you feel weigh you down. Okay, so yeah, because your mental health is so important, and having a felt sense of safety and acceptance is just so integral, and I think it's so important for everyone, for everyone's cognitive health, for everyone's mental health, emotional well-being. Yeah. Alright, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and this video. Please let me know if you have any other suggestions, and I will see you all on the next one.